I'm pretty sure Nick said that we're not affiliated with any dominatrix. No? Domination? Domination. Okay. Thanks, Nick. My name's Steve Farnsworth. I'm alcoholic.
Hi, Steve.
I'm going to presume that nobody put out the word that this was going to be a traditions meeting. Otherwise, I'm thinking the room would probably be about 25% full. I was invited here to share my perception of my experience on the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll try to do it in the best way I can without getting too studious or industrial about it, and just kind of share with you the way I see it. Just a little bit of quick background. I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous since June 18th of 1989, and I have always been an active, at the very least, an active attendee of Alcoholics Anonymous. Whether or not I was an actual member or not, that's up for debate. My first 7 years of sobriety, I didn't do a whole lot except go to meetings and not drink, and because I have a tendency of hearing what I want to hear rather than what people say, and I think that's okay. I think we're all entitled to our perceptions, but what I heard almost killed me, and what I heard was that if I just didn't drink and went to meetings, I'd be okay. And it wasn't until I destroyed my life sober 1,000 times worse than I ever did drinking, was I at a point where I was desperate enough to ask another man for help. And fortunately, the person who I asked for help was what I believe was armed with the facts of his life, as they say in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he shared his experience with me, and more important than that, he put me into action in sharing my experience with others quickly. He'd say something like, he tells me stuff. He says, "Steve, these new guys are like wet cement. You got to get them moving while they're wet, because if you wait and you let the cement harden, you're going to have to get a jackhammer to get them to do anything." and that's been my experience. You get moving quick. It's kind of like when I went to the bar. I didn't have to analyze the bar scene or the alcohol industry, or read a book before I just took a drink and got the results. You know what I mean? And so we take the actions, we get the results, and then we can sit back and talk about why we got the results that we got, so we can continue to get the results that we like and stop getting the results that we don't like. It's really basic, that simple. The couple of disclaimers. One is I am not up here representing Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to get that out real quick. The majority of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous, based on the hearsay that I get sent back to me, they think I'm a complete whack job. Maybe I'm like some kind of a cult leader, these kinds of things, all kinds of different pot shots. They can think what they want. I don't even know who they are, but you know what I mean. And I'm really not interested. What I'm really interested in is my brother or my sister who's sitting before me dying, asking me for help. That's what I'm interested in the most. I could care less if I ever speak from another podium as long as I live. But one thing's for sure is the majority of the people at Alcoholics Anonymous do not agree with me. But Alcoholics Anonymous is a very big place, a lot of people in AA, and so this very small percentage of people that do see things similar to the way I see them is still a lot of people. So I've been in very good company for the last, however many years that I've been doing this. But I really want to make sure that you know that I know. It's more important that you know that I know that I don't represent Alcoholics Anonymous, because when I start sharing my experience with you with these principles, you're going to hear some very deep passion, because I have a strong passion for God and for AA and for being my brother's keeper and helping others. And I suspect that sometimes that passion comes across as self-righteousness, and it may be even condemnation or being condescending towards the way other people see things. Other people see things, whatever. Anyways, I also respect other people's perceptions. It's okay that I don't think we're all supposed to be exactly identical. I don't think the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous anywhere says that we're supposed to be kicking out robots. We all have our personal experiences. We all have our perceptions. But there are some basic principles, the fundamental principles, that you cannot compromise. And those fundamental principles, in my opinion, are laid out in the 12 Steps and the 12 Traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. I really believe that just like we were taught in English composition in school, we were taught how to communicate. We were taught how to do it on paper, but we automatically do it when we communicate. We start off with an introduction. This is what I want to talk about. And then you have the body, which would be your substantiating evidence, and then you have your conclusion or your summary. And we talk like that usually. If anybody pays attention, it's like, hey Bill, can I talk to you about ... And then you're like, yeah, sure. And we go over here, we start talking about it, and then we kind of conclude it and break. I believe the steps and the traditions are laid out the same way. The first two steps state our dilemma, and the first two traditions state our dilemma. And then we have the substantiating, evidence, if you will, or the things that we have to do in order to accomplish what it is we just stated in both cases, and then we summarize it with the 12 in both cases. Real briefly, my experience with the 12 steps is when I don't really like the term the real alcoholic, because it kind of it implies that I'm trying to tell you. They say that that I am and you're not, or I'm a better alcoholic than you, which is kind of But I think what they're talking about, because remember back in the 1930s, they didn't have a fellowship where they were having all these people being dumped in by the courts and by the rehabs and everybody else. But what they were trying to do is they were trying to differentiate between somebody who just has a problem drinking and somebody who has this thing that we refer to as a spiritual malady. And in my opinion, and based on the research that I've been able to do, thank God for Google, because my ADHD would not allow me to go to a library. But alcoholism as a spiritual condition is at least as old as the Bible. The word alcohol in Latin comes from spiritus, but alcoholism as a drinking problem, I believe, got started somewhere around the beginning of the 20th century when the scientists identified the chemical and named it ethyl alcohol. Prior to that, they called it, if you look at all the literature from the Washingtonians in the 1800s, you got, malts, ales, lagers, whiskeys, bourbons, but no mention of the word alcohol. And but they talked about alcoholism in the Bible as a spiritual condition. It's the way I feel when I'm sober. If drinking was my problem, if I was a problem drinker calling himself an alcoholic, I could have stopped coming to AA a long time ago, because I haven't had the desire to drink for over 22 years. But yet I still have to come to AA, and my life still got really bad, just not drinking and going to meetings. But this other type of alcoholism, this spiritual malady, and that so we have different. Obviously there are people that should not be drinking. They're problem drinkers, and when they stop drinking, their life gets great, and it's wonderful that they have a place to come to find other people that are just not drinking, and living great lives. The problem is when one of these problem drinkers, calling themselves a alcoholic, tries to sponsor somebody like myself who has both. I'm definitely a man who should not be drinking. I have a history of throwing up on perfect strangers. That's not good drinking. But so I'm not saying that I'm not a problem drinker. I'm just saying that problem got removed. But now I have this spiritual malady, this other type of alcoholism that is a condition that I have to treat on a regular basis. And I don't really even like calling it a disease, to be quite honest with you, because I would have, in order for me to call this spiritual condition a disease, I would also have to call hunger a disease and dehydration a disease. Because as long as I treat it, it's actually one of the most beautiful gifts a human being can be given, in my opinion. The gift to be able to, where the best psychiatrists and the best doctors and the best parents and the best lovers and the best clergymen have not been able to reach out and touch the hearts of people like us, but you and I have been given that gift to be able to do that merely by sharing our experience. And I don't know if they want to call that a disease. I think they're a disease, to be quite honest with you. I think we've been given a gift. So we have these different perceptions of what alcoholism is, and we have different ideas of it, and different degrees of maybe both of them, right? So my point, the reason why I'm saying this when I'm trying to talk about traditions, is because I think it's normal for us to have different groups that are carrying different messages. I think it's normal. I think it's healthy, that we don't have any one group that speaks for AA as a whole. And we don't have any one person that speaks for AA as a whole. And if the 12 traditions can be summed up in one word, in my opinion, I think it would be humility. And humility is not something that you can necessarily fake. You either are aware of how vital and important other people are in your life, or you're not. And if you really are, you're not going to disrespect these other people in your life. Because you realize that you're disrespecting the thing that's going to keep you alive. There's a reason why solitary confinement works so well in prisons. We are not designed to be alone. And if I'm going to, I need other people in my life. In June 18th of 1989, there's a lot of opinions going around about Steve Farnsworth, but I think the one thing that everybody would agree upon is it sucked to be Steve Farnsworth. I did not come to AA because I had nothing better to do. And 7 years later, when I drove my life into the ground, just going to meetings and not drinking, it sucked even worse to be Steve Farnsworth. And I was doing nothing except going to meetings. There's a pamphlet called A Member's Eye View, and in that pamphlet it says if you're just coming to meetings and you're sitting in these cold metal chairs and drinking a coffee and waiting for something to rub off, the only thing that rubs off is rigor mortis and death. And that's what happened to me. And I came very close to dying sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. So anyways, I got walked through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and my sponsor was very persistent about the fact that I needed to go out and pass this thing on to others. And fortunately, I've been around long enough to be aware that I am not qualified to help others. And I even told him, I said, Tom, Tom's like, go help that new guy. And I'm like, Tom, I'm not qualified to help anybody. He says, I know you're not qualified. You know you're not qualified, but he doesn't know you're not qualified. Get over there. And I'd say, well, what do I say when I get over there? And he says, God will tell you when you get there. I'm like, well, why can't I know now? He says, because you'll screw it up between here and there. Just get over there. So I'm not just trying to be funny. What I'm saying is I was really fortunate to be in AA long enough to not die and get smashed into a state of really seriously knowing that I am not qualified. But God is qualified, and all I got to do is get out of the way and allow God to use me as a conduit, not as the source. And so my sponsor, so I was dead in the water until I allowed another man to help me, and then I was going to be dead again if I didn't go out and share this with others. So you can see how vital it was for others to be in my life. And so, we're all these little meat puppets walking around this planet of, self-will and, different perceptions and different experiences and all this other stuff. And, but even amongst our differences, if we don't stay together, then we're going to die alone. So you can see how our common welfare has to come first. Because if we don't stay together, I'm not going to need to worry about personal recovery. I'm not going to need to worry about 12 steps because there's not going to be any. There's not going to be any 12 steps for me if I don't have others in my life. And so that's the dilemma. Just like in the first step, I have this emptiness in my soul that I call a powerlessness condition because without even being conscious of it, I'm going out chasing human powers, trying to manage my own life, trying to satisfy that emptiness in my soul. I don't believe that I need a step to tell me that I'm a man who should not be drinking. I don't believe that's what the first step is really about. And if I get caught up in the words, I'm going to miss the music. So we want to listen for the music behind the words. And I don't need a commandment to tell me that I'm not supposed to kill because I keep forgetting that. You know what I mean? That's not what the commandment means. You can see how words get in the way. Let me tell you, I believe, and I have believed for a long time, that human nature's number one and most popular character defect, shortcoming, is allowing the form of something to take precedence over the primary purpose. And I call it machinery. What happens is something really beautiful reveals itself in the heart of a man or a woman. And it's so beautiful and so pure and it's so undeniable but indescribable. The closest thing I can come to trying to compare it to is when you hold a baby in your arms. What happens to you when you hold a baby in your arms? You can't deny what happens to your heart, but to put words to accurately describe it are impossible. The heart has reason that reason knows nothing of. And but we want to share it, And so we go out, and in the attempts to try to share it, what we do is we use parables, which comes from the same root as compare. It's kind of like this, it's kind of like that, it's kind of like this. It's like narrowing it down to like this bullseye, to where I'm like, okay, I feel it, I'm hitting that bullseye. And when I'm not feeling it, the form that the lack of awareness takes is many and varied, and hundreds of forms of fear. And but the solution is always to go back to the bullseye, go back to God, go back to love, And coincidentally, 2,000 years ago, I wasn't there, but the number one weapon of choice for man to defend himself was the bow and arrow, archery, sport of archery. And in the sport of archery, the term used to miss the mark, miss the bullseye, is the word sin. And I suspect that that's where the word sin came from. It just means that I'm not hitting that point. I'm not feeling that love in my heart. I'm not okay right here, right now. And because they were comparing it to something that everybody else could understand. And but then eventually what ended up happening is just the form started taking precedence over the primary purpose. So what ends up happening is I go out and I start trying to share this. And if I have an effective way of communicating what it is that I'm trying to share in my heart, then a fellowship is going to grow up around me. In the book of Matthew they talk about a wedding ceremony, but in the big book they talk about a fellowship goes up around me. All right, so now I start having all these, like a following, right? And then eventually, if it's really genuine, if it's really real, and if it's really contagious, an effective means of communicating it or passing it on, that fellowship is going to get so big to where we can't all congregate in the same place at the same time. So we have to have multiple meetings. And now some people are going to get attracted to the happy people and the nice meetings and the fun, and they're going to go share their experience. And they're going to say, yeah, I just go to these meetings and I hang out with these happy people and I'm having a great time. And everybody thinks that, yeah, if you just go to meetings, everything's going to be wonderful. And they don't even know what the primary purpose was. The form has taken precedence over the primary purpose. It's the same thing when we started writing the big book. Because remember that telephone game we played when we were little kids? We'd go around the room and the story would change 50 times before we get back to you. I believe that that's what these guys and the founders of AA were finding out is that these people in Cleveland were talking a totally different game than these people in New York. The people in LA were really far out there, and they said we got to get this thing written down before it gets so watered down that it's completely rendered useless and ineffective. And so they wrote a book down. They started getting collecting the common experiences and wrote this book, and now eventually people start using this book like it's your God. And the book is taking precedence over the primary purpose. And nowhere in that book does it say use this book for this purpose. Because there was no book. That book is a report of what people did for 4 years with no book. It is a very effective tool, don't get me wrong. But it's not supposed to take away from your personal experience with God, your personal journey with God, in order to get that depth and weight that you need in order to overcome, whether it be the alcohol, the drugs, or the sex, or the gambling, or whatever it is your issue is. But alcoholism, in my opinion, is that untreated spiritual malady. That's just my experience, my opinion. AA has no opinions. Steve Farnsworth has a lot of them, and as you can see. But so, just like in the first step, it talked about I have this powerlessness condition that no human power is going to satisfy. That doesn't mean that I can't enjoy human powers. It just means I can't use them to fill the emptiness of my soul any more than I can use a car when I'm hungry. I can't go eat the car. I need to. It doesn't mean I can't have a car. And so you can still have a girlfriend, you can still have money, you just can't use it to fill the emptiness in your soul. You got to get tapped into a power bigger than human, and that's what the second step is, the solution, which is that I got to get tapped in this power. We call it God because people know what we're talking about when we call it that. I'm not here to tell you what God is. For all I know, God is the Big Bang, like the scientists say. Okay, great, but that's God. Whatever the creator or director is, I don't know. I think that if that power wanted us to know intellectually what he was, we would know. The fact that we don't, I believe, is by design. So there's our problem and our solution, and then the rest of these steps show me how I'm going to get to that solution. The 12th tradition is saying the same thing. The problem is that without our common welfare, I'm not going to need to worry about personal recovery. And the only way we're going to get that common welfare is by getting a God awareness, or in other words, something that makes sense to our hearts, not our heads, in our groups. And then the rest of the tradition shows us how to do that. In other words, it tells us that we have no leaders. We have trusted servants. You and I both know that we go to any group and you can see some leaders, some people that without those people the group would fall apart. But that doesn't mean that they're really leaders in this sense. The reason why these people are probably the leaders is because they know that they're not the leaders. And they're letting this power of love to guide them. And that's why people are automatically attracted to them. And and it's real easy to get a group conscience with two people. Hey Joe, you want to go to get a cup of coffee? You're like, oh yeah, okay, there's our group conscience. There we go. You start getting 3 people, like, yeah, but I kind of want to go do this. And like, and then you start getting 5, 6, 10, 20, 30 people trying to get a group conscience. It gets a little challenge. The most effective way I've seen a group conscience executed, without letting the form take precedence over the primary purpose. In other words, we don't need to make it a rule, just some simple guidelines to try to nudge these groups towards some kind of a decision that has love at its core, is to put out a motion or a subject, something to discuss, have some discussion, have somebody make a motion, and then you vote on it, and then you get a majority and a minority, and then once you've had the vote and you have the majority and the minority, you need to go to the people in the minority, because most people would just kind of be satisfied, okay, there's the vote stands. But AA's concepts talks about the minority voice, and it's even in business they have Robert's Rules of Orders or something like that kind of celebrates the minority voice, and I've seen the minority voice change the majority opinion. It's vital, because the thing about delusion, every one of us here knows that we've all experienced delusion, and by definition that means I don't know a minute when I'm in it, right? And you and I, both know that, girl meets boy at AA campus, and everybody's looking like, woo, they're both delusional. You know what I mean? But they're in complete agreement, right? They're sharing the same delusion, right? And I've seen groups get completely delusional. And then all of a sudden some new guy comes in and says, yeah, but what about, and everybody looks at you like, holy shit, yeah. They didn't even think about that. That whole thing about, the reason why we do this is because that's the way we've always done that is a really stupid reason to continue to do something. And that new man or that new woman, that minority voice will bring fresh air into the group, to breathe life into your group, The word espiritus in Latin, I told you, is alcoholism, although, and I think the Latin root of espiritus is breath, like the breath of life, And God knows we can use it in some of these groups, right? Although I judge nobody. But anyways, so we get this majority. We go to the minority and we say, okay, just you people that voted in the minority, do you have something to say? And you let them speak, right? And then after they speak, you go to the majority and you say, okay, did anybody in the majority, after hearing the minority, anybody want to change your vote? And if one person says yes, you want to do a complete revote. And then it's possible it could switch. Now you have a new majority and a new minority, and then again you want to go to the minority. You guys want to say anything? And then after you say anything, you go to the majority. Does anybody want to change their vote? So theoretically, you can see how this could go on forever. It's only going to go a couple cycles before everybody. Not only does everybody agree to disagree, but more important than all that, the people that did not win the vote, if you will, they know that we went above and beyond the call of duty to make sure their voice was heard. And the other thing about group conscience is it can always be changed tomorrow. It's never, we don't write it in stone. Something else could get revealed tomorrow that might want us to just change our group conscience. My grant sponsor, Wally, he said to me one time, he said, Steve, take your best plans and write them in sand. Don't write them in stone. Write them in sand. Because that way, when the high tide of life comes and washes your plans away, it won't hurt so much. And so we don't write this stuff down. That's why I have a little problem with some of these service structures, and they get into their bylaws and everything else. We don't need that stuff. Well, all we need is the 12 traditions, in my opinion. But I know this is going to surprise the hell out of you, but these people aren't coming to me going, hey, Steve Farnsworth, what do you think? As a matter of fact, they probably wish I just shut up. But anyways, so this is how God reveals ourselves in our group conscience, just the same way He does in our lives, in our personal lives. I make a decision. I try to get as informed as I can, and then I make a decision and I move forward. Now, and that's another thing too that I think is really, really vital when it comes to group conscience is the word informed. There's a big difference between group conscience, simple group conscience, and informed group conscience. And for those of you who aren't aware, these 12 traditions right here, this is the short form. The long form of the 12 traditions is actually written first. I suspect that they shortened them up in order to get them up next to the steps on the window shades. But when they shortened them up and took some of the words out, in my opinion, they lost some of their integrity. A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Drink deep from the fountain of knowledge, or don't drink at all. Most people don't even know that that's the full quote. And, in other words, don't stop drinking. No, don't stop drinking. That one, don't stop pursuing knowledge. You know what I mean? And so the problem is not pursuing knowledge. The problem is when I think I got it, and I stop pursuing. That's called a closed mind. That's the problem. The problem, there's nothing wrong with pursuing knowledge. Just don't get to a point where you think you got it. I joke a lot about how when I state my opinion, I like to throw out the fact that I have a long history of being delusional, because it's funny, first of all, but also it lets people know that just because I really strongly believe this, and I have for a long time, doesn't mean it's the truth. I'm still growing, and my perception may change later. And I always want to stay that way, because I don't ever want to stop being teachable. Okay? I always want to continue to grow. So now the rest of these traditions are going to show us how to attain this group, this love, this power of love or power of God in our group consciences, in our groups, to help help us continue to serve our purpose. And in the third tradition, it's the short form of the third tradition talks about the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Well, the judge had a desire for me to stop drinking. My commanding officer had a desire for me to stop drinking. Are we going to get caught up in words? And if we are, then let's take a look at the long form of the third tradition, because the long form of the third tradition doesn't talk about that. The long form of the third tradition says we feel Alcoholics Anonymous membership should include anybody who suffers from alcoholism. Well, now we're back again to defining what alcoholism is. We got the problem drinker calling himself an alcoholic, and we got the guy with the spirituality calling himself an alcoholic. I took my niece when she was 9 years old to the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and with the exception of the sex conduct list, thankfully, she totally got it. She totally understood. Well, she had that spirituality. She had that type of alcoholism at 9 years old. So if we're going to get, if we want to start playing amateur lawyer, then let's go. I think, let's start playing with semantics, or we can start looking at the spirit of the message, that underlies these words, and stop getting caught up in the semantics and forget what we're here for. What we're here is to try to save our lives by trying to save the lives of our brothers and sisters. And we don't want to ever lose sight of that primary purpose. We don't want to let the form take precedence over the primary purpose, because we may be right, but then we'll be dead right, because we'll be dead. And we don't want to lose that. So we want to make sure that the love doesn't leave the room. That's this God guidance. And so when it says, when it talks about the only requirement for membership, and it says that we feel, any two alcoholics that want to get together for the purposes of sobriety. Well, there again, you can go define the word sobriety. Only one definition in the dictionary talks about abstinence from alcohol. There's about 3 others that talk about sane thinking and these kinds of things, sober thinking. So, we can play that game if we want. But I think what really boils down to is we're going to find in these next 2 traditions, 4 and 5, that what it's really telling us is that we're not all going to see it the same way. We're never going to be in complete agreement. And you can fight to be right if you want. And you may either send that person off pissed off, or you may send them off agreeing with you, or reluctantly. But it's only going to be to make room for the next guy that wants to fight. And so you're just going to be spending your whole life fighting if you really have to be right. But I'd much rather be happy than right. But so I don't want to get caught up in that. But each group says each group is autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. Just like each one of us as individuals are autonomous. We're these individual. We're all part of the same whole. We're all part of the same creation. But within that creation, we're these little autonomous entities of self-will. That as long as my behavior does not negatively affect other people or society as a whole, people are typically not going to have a problem with me. But as soon as it starts negatively affecting others, people are going to start having a problem with me. And it's the same thing with our groups. If our groups start negatively affecting other groups or AA as a whole, people may start saying, hey, there's a problem over here. But the truth is do you ever notice how Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't have any police? Because the spiritual consequence for not adhering to spiritual principle is, if that's not painful enough, the drink is going to get us long before any police activity could get us. Do we get the bottle? We don't need police. Add to the fact that even if there were, that good luck. I mean, does anybody here have any experience with the police? How well did that go, right? But here's where I think I'm going to really make the point that I was trying to make in this third tradition, and I'll try to tie them together. Is it says each group has but one primary purpose. Doesn't mean it has just one purpose. We have lots of purposes. We have lots of things that we want to do, but we have one primary purpose, and that is to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And I think that very often we overlook the word "it's." Each group is okay to have for one group to be carrying one type of message, and another group carrying a different message, because spiritual consequence will police that. If you really truly are hurting Alcoholics Anonymous, it won't be supported. It won't. It'll die. And so a lot of times what I suggest to people when they're asking me about group conscience, I tell them, well, when you get your group together, and you have a dilemma of should I or shouldn't I do something, right? All you need to do is ask yourself, is this going to enhance our primary purpose, or at the very least not distract us from it? And if they say, well, I don't know what our primary purpose is, I say, well, maybe you guys might want to have a little group conscience and decide what your primary purpose is before you go any further. Because how are you going to know whether you're being distracted from it if you don't even know what it is? It's like, well, my primary purpose is to come here and dump my problems. Well, my primary purpose is to come here and find somebody to get laid. My primary purpose is to, is to get away from my wife at home. My primary purpose is to, come in here and annoy everybody. And feed Steve's ADHD. Or you could have a primary purpose of carrying a message of love, a message of recovery from alcoholism as a spiritual condition through God dependence, through service to others. And once I have that identified, and then if we can adopt a second group conscience decision that says all further group conscience decisions will either enhance or at the very least not distract us from our stated primary purpose. And that way when somebody comes in with a really, really good idea, theirs, right? And everybody's like, oh, wow, how can we? Because, so often we will compromise the truth out of politeness because we are afraid to hurt somebody's feelings, And so what we can do is we can say, well, we have a group conscience that says that all group conscience decisions are going to enhance or at the very least not distract us from our primary purpose. So how is that going to enhance it? And they can say, well, I think that's a stupid group conscience decision. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. Then let's go back and revisit that as a group conscience decision before we address this one and see if the rest of the group agrees with you. It just seems to be a very mature and very loving and very effective way at calming down these bad ideas that come in that create machinery. Because I started to say at the beginning of this, when these groups start coming, these people start coming, and all these, this stuff starts getting kicked out, like just don't drink and go to meetings, and don't sponsor anybody of the opposite sex, and can't, have a relationship in the first year, and all this other stuff. This is machinery. It's like the state trying to take care of somebody. The state can do a lot for somebody, but they can't give love. And people like us with this spirituality, if we don't have something with depth and weight, in other words, love, it's not. You might as well be Charlie Brown's teacher. In Corinthians, it talks about how you can be the best prophet in the world, but if you have no love, then you're just tingling cymbals. You're just making a bunch of noise. And but it has to have some depth and weight, otherwise it's not going to work for me. I'm not staying. I'm going to have to go get relief in another way. And there's lots of ways I can get relief other than alcohol and drugs that are just as self-destructive. And then I proved that for 7 years coming to AA on a regular basis. But so it's okay that we have groups that are just problem drinkers, calling themselves alcoholics, coming here, raising their hand, whining and crying about their problems. I like to call them the uninformed talking to the uninterested. You know, I mean, people. You know, I haven't examined my experience, so I have no clue what happened, but I want to share about it anyways. You know, and everybody else is sitting there wondering what they're going to think about what they're going to say when they get called on. So, you know, so they're not listening, right? So you got the uninformed talking to the uninterested. But anyways, it's just I don't know, whatever. But every group is allowed to do what they want to do. But I found groups that are effective at carrying a message of God dependence through service to others as a recovery for alcoholism as a spiritual malady. These groups tend to be the only people that are sharing in these groups are people that have experience with the problem and the solution. Now, everybody that comes into Alcoholics Anonymous, unless they should have experience with a problem. If they don't, then they got another problem that they have some serious experience with. Why would you come to AA if you don't have, you know, whatever? But but not everybody in AA has experience with a solution. You know, and that's one of the reasons why most people that come to AA don't stay. You know, my sponsor Tom used to say, you know, we don't have a problem at the front door, we got a problem at the back door. We got a lot of people coming into AA, opportunities to help people, and we don't grab them while they're here. They go out the back door and they think they already tried AA and it doesn't work, and it's really unfortunate. Because I don't know about you guys, but there wasn't too many places that were making me feel welcome when I came here, but AA did. And so we don't want to let this machinery get in the way, and we want to try to smash it at all costs, and just don't lose sight of what our primary purpose is, which is to carry a message of love. And there is no greater love than laying down my life for my brother. And I'm not talking about taking a bullet. You can only do that once. I'm talking about stopping my busy schedule long enough to sit down with my brother or my sister and share with them my experience with these spiritual principles to the best of my ability, but more importantly, to try to get them enough of a nudge, enough motivation to turn them around and get them to go do it for somebody else. Because I got a lot out of having my sponsor take me through the steps, but in comparison to what I gained from taking others through the steps, they are apples and oranges. You know, I have amongst many fetishes that I have, one of them that I can talk about is I have a flying fetish, and I teach flying, and I love flying. I love everything about aviation. And at the same thing, I learned a lot learning aerodynamic principle in school. But in comparison to what I learned in teaching, you can't compare it. They're just apples and oranges, you know. And if you haven't had the experience of taking up another man or a woman through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and watching the lights come on in their eyes, you're missing the whole purpose. You're missing it. Because that is where our real joy comes from. You know, my sponsor says, he's talking about people, what the drink is for people like me. He says it's like if you want to get a bone away from a dog, you need to offer him a steak. You know, and then he won't be worried about the bone. You know, and you want to take my drink away, but you're not offering me a sufficient replacement. I'm eventually going to go back to the drink or something just as destructive. And you know, the steak is watching those lights come on in my brother and my sister's eyes when I sit down and share my experience with them. And the Christians talk about that little fish they've eaten. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, feed him for a lifetime. Come with me and make you a fisher of men. The translation as Steve sees it, because Bill has it as Bill sees it, I get it as Steve sees it. I can share my experience with you with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and give you relief for a second. I can show you how to share your experience with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and feed you for a lifetime. Come with me and I'll show you how to find others to share your experience with. Same principle. That's where we get our bang for our buck, is in helping others. This is not a self-help program, it is a helping others program. And if nobody's told you that, it's fine. It's high time somebody did. We don't get caught up in endorsing or financing lending to AA named any related facility or outside enterprise because the problems of money, property, or prestige divert us from our primary purpose. Two things there. One is, like I said, we all have differences in experiences. There's probably a ton of people in this room right now that are going, who is this idiot up there talking? You know, who does he think he is with all this wishy-washy, feel-good, you know, garbage? You know, traditions are rules, you know, because they're not rules. Because, you know, they were originally, when they were brought to AA fellowship, they were called the rules for unity, but they're like, no, we're not doing rules. You know, and they changed it to traditions because alcoholics don't do rules. You know, add to the fact that it gets in the way of God. It's machinery. It's what it is. We have to hold on to our primary purpose. We can't let the form of this stuff get in the way of our primary purpose. And the other thing about that particular tradition is it says these problems of money, power, and prestige that will divert us from our primary purpose. Well, how are we going to know if they're diverting us from our primary purpose if we don't know what our primary purpose is? It's essential that we know what our primary purpose is, not only in our groups but in our individual lives. When I made my third step decision that I was going to serve God from now on to the best of my ability, not perfectly, but to the best of my ability, now on, every decision I make in my life is real simple. Is this going to enhance my ability to do that, or is it going to distract me from it? It's real simple. But I can't do that if I don't know what my primary purpose is. I know, and a lot of, we hear, whenever people pass the basket, they talk about we're practicing the seventh tradition. Well, in my little distorted perception of the world, I really think that it's closer to being the sixth tradition than the seventh tradition. Do I really? Like I said, I don't need a commandment to tell me I shouldn't kill. I don't need a step to tell me I'm a man who should not drink. I don't need a tradition to tell me that I should be paying my bills. I learned that a long time ago. I didn't learn it very well, but I learned it. But my point is that I know it, I just don't practice it very well. But anyway, the seventh tradition, where it talks about each group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. It's not just talking about money. Money definitely includes money, but there's lots of other types of contributions people can make to a group if they can't afford to throw cash in the basket. Like attendance. That's a means of supporting the, picking up chairs and making coffee and doing other things, or contributing to the group conscience. There's lots of things that you can do to contribute to a group in order to support it. But here, what this seventh tradition really is, in my opinion, is our police activity. It's our one and only genuine, undeniable, unmistakable measuring stick as to whether or not we're truly serving God rather than serving ourselves. In other words, serving the power of love. If a group is not serving a purpose, people are not going to come. It's just not going to be attended. When you hear people raise their hand in meetings saying, the ABC group on Thursday night is in need of support, I beg to differ. I think the ABC group on Thursday night needs to die. Because if it was really serving a purpose, it would be supported. And attendance, just for the record, is a very poor measuring stick as to whether or not a group is serving its primary or is effective. It's not a good measuring stick of effectiveness. One of my flying gigs, I fly down to this island down in North Carolina. We have a little group there. It's like 2 or 3 people if we're lucky. Sometimes it's just me sitting there waiting for somebody, because it's on a little island. But it's self-supporting. And by our voluntary contributions. We're not out there, asking people for money. We're not charging admission. People are voluntarily supporting it with their money and their time and their experience and their hearts. And that's how we know if a group is really, truly effective. And and you can feel the air when you have a group like that. And so, like I said, the key word is voluntary. And that's one of the reasons why we decline outside contributions. We don't want to screw up the one and only real measuring stick that we have. Somebody comes in and says, our group can't pay its rent, and somebody else comes in and says, well, I really like this group, so I'll give you guys 3 months worth of rent to keep the group going for 3 months. They're like, no, you can't do that. Matter of fact, my home group's going through that right now up in Springfield, and we're going to shut it down. And we have a guy offering to pay our rent to get it caught up to keep us from shutting it down because he really likes the group, and we're like, no. We can't take it. It's an outside contribution, even though he's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know if you know this or not, but Alcoholics Anonymous also has adopted a rule that says, an individual member can only contribute so much money a year. When I first got sober, I think it was like $1,000, but I think a lot of our service structure has gotten a little caught up in the machinery, and I think they got it up to something like $10 million now. I don't know, but I get very judgmental with the service structure. I'm sorry. The machinery is very much alive, in my opinion, in the service structure. I do believe that it has a purpose. I just think it's out of control. But I judge no man. But anyways, we need that measuring stick. That's why we don't take outside contributions. That's how I know whether or not my efforts are truly serving a purpose. It doesn't mean that my efforts aren't necessarily serving a purpose, but maybe it's just not serving a purpose right here, right now. Or maybe it's outlived its purpose. We have an issue like that with Perry Hall down in Maryland. We kind of think it's outlived its purpose. And we've got some pretty good signs as to why it's doing it. I guess we're definitely shutting it down. I have an announcement. Perry Hall's shutting down January 31st. I forgot to tell you guys that. Anyways, and they're moving to Columbia, Maryland. But anyways, Alcoholics Anonymous remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. We have these service centers, and there are some things. Every one of them got started for a good reason. But just like in every other thing in human nature, the machinery has grown to the point where you don't even know why it got started. They don't even know what their primary purpose is anymore. They're so caught up in all kinds of stuff. It's not their fault. It's just part of human nature. It's just a cycle of, and eventually it'll die, and then the primary purpose will reveal itself again, and it'll just go through that cycle again. But if we're going to have these service centers, and we're going to have full-time people working there, we need to pay them full-time for a full-time job. Salary, benefits, retirement, 401k, whatever they get, vacation, just like you would any other employee. Or if like you have a clubhouse, even though their clubhouses are not affiliated with AA, if there's a clubhouse and they're practicing the 12 traditions, you can't expect the janitor to work for free. You got to pay him. You should pay market rate. And then we don't want to get organized, but we may create service boards or committees that are directly responsible to those they serve. For fellowship that is not organized, we got a lot of meetings that start on time and end on time every single night of the week. I don't know if you ever tried to find any other organization that has that many meetings that start on time and end on time. But we're pretty organized, because we let God organize us, if that makes sense. In other words, the idea, chaos is not a spiritual principle. We have to have, minimal organization. It's kind of like in the steps where we talk about I cannot manage my own life. That doesn't mean that I don't know what time I'm supposed to get up, or that doesn't mean that that I can't go put gas in my car, or whatever. But minimal organization is the message. We don't want to get so organized that we don't leave room for God. We need to know who's going to unlock the church. We need to know who's going to pay the bill. We need to know who's going to make the coffee and set up the chairs and clean up. But we don't want to get so organized that we don't leave room for God. We don't want to let the machinery take precedence over our primary purpose. And like I said earlier, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. Like I said, every single one of us in here has opinions, and it's okay. And there's a time and a place for bringing those opinions up. Typically, the best time and place is not here from the podium. Basically being, up here, like people take pot shots at you. I mean, one of the things I hate about doing this is I feel like, the word naked does not mean unclothed; it means unprotected. And but it's like a naked feeling when you just throw your opinions out there, just like for however many people are here to judge you. You know what I mean? It's a very strange experience. So this is not the place necessarily to be throwing out opinions, although I was invited to do that. I think the best place to do it, just like the best place to do anything in Alcoholics Anonymous, is one-on-one. At the diner tables, in the car rides, on the park benches, in the kitchen tables, where it's just two people learning and growing, trying to get as informed as possible. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes. The problem is when I keep making the same mistakes over and over again. I need to learn. That's what the inventory and amends process is all about, is learning and growing from my mistakes. And it's much bigger than AA. Socrates, 500 BC, said a life unexamined is not worth living. You go down to Washington, D.C., in the Museum of Natural History, it says men who forget their past are doomed to repeat it. We have to examine our experiences in order to learn and grow from them. And sitting down one-on-one, sharing my opinions, sharing my perceptions, letting them share theirs with me, going to the literature, doing some research, going to other people, trying to get informed. That's how we do it. We need each other. Remember, the solitary confinement will kill people like you and I. And every single one of us in this room knows that we can be completely alone in a room full of people. We can be completely alone in a stadium full of people. We can build our own little prison spiritually and go just as insane as we would if we were in solitary confinement. But that's the place where opinions need to be brought out, in my opinion. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Most people, at least in my experience, I'm going to try to speed this up here, but most people in my experience, when I was new, I was taught that anonymity was about, who you see here, what you see here, let it say here, blah, 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 right? Here again, if I'm paying attention in this thing we call life, I don't need a tradition to tell me I shouldn't be going talking about your stuff behind your back. That's simple courtesy, And the principle of anonymity is not about protecting my reputation. The principle of anonymity is designed to protect Alcoholics Anonymous' reputation from people like me whose egos can be very out of control, and I don't even know it's out of control, And that's why it's so vital for me to tell you, not so you know, but so that I know that you know that I don't represent Alcoholics Anonymous. That is what anonymity is really about. It's not about, saying, my name's Steve F. It's not, you know what I mean? It's like, go look up Steve F. in the Philadelphia phone book and, and try to find me. It's not about not using my last name. The machinery has destroyed that. The machinery has kicked out this thing where we can't use our last names. It's a bunch of garbage. Even Dr. Bob said that. We don't want to be so anonymous that people can't find us. Our primary purpose is for people to find us. We don't want to be that anonymous. But so if we do get to the level of press, radio, and films, and now the internet and television, I guess I didn't have then, and whatever, it's not about necessarily saying, I'm not in AA, because anybody that's been around AA is going to be able to pick up on the words and go, wow, this guy's in AA, even though he's trying not to be. You know what I mean? It's like, it's really about going above and beyond the call of duty to make sure that people know that, yes, I have experience, obviously, by the lingo that I'm using in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I don't represent AA. Matter of fact, take a poll and ask how many people think that I represent AA. And we're like, no, he's a jerk. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. I don't have a long form of the 12th tradition here, but it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen written. But basically what it talks about is it sums it up. Remember, the first two traditions were our dilemma followed by our solution. The rest of the stuff is the substantiating evidence of the body. And now we're summing it up, and we're basically saying that humility expressed through anonymity is the one thing that's going to save us. It's going to allow us to stay together, even amongst our differences and opinions and perceptions and experiences. And that's what we're looking for altogether, is unity. We have to stay together even amongst our differences. And I think the words that it uses in the long form is we can stay together so that we can have this humble contemplation of Him, capital H, who presides over us all. That's where we get our guidance and our direction. Not from any kind of written words or literature or anybody else or some bozo from a podium. That's me. But from God. And we do that by recognizing that I am dead in the water without you. And I am honored that you guys invited me to come here and share my experience with you tonight. Thank you very much.